it is absolutely true that Flipkart use price as a mechanism to attract customers, but Flipkart invested heavily in tech and supply chain. They were the first ones to solve for cost for cash on delivery. They were the first ones to solve for reliable supply chain. They actually invested, right. uh, uh, there are many players who today are not in the face of this earth, and they are the people who actually only discounted and they never invested any of their money. Flipkart did both, right. Flipkart did
Right.
both. That's what I would say. And they were able to do, and let me tell you that, right, every single time when you reduce the cost.
To be very honest, if I was a VC, I wouldn't have funded myself. Like, that was how bad the presentation was.
To build scale, you have to think scale.
Sometimes I think too much of money restricts innovation. I think that's a sad part.
So destiny finds you on the road that you take to avoid it.
Whenever you get seat on a rocket ship, you don't ask which seat.
We didn't really ask ourselves like too many questions in terms of how big can we get it.
So it was very hard to explain what is UGC.
If we want to implement something, first dirty our own hands.
For me, 1 million to 10 million is where scale.
So again, we had basic teams, struggle, but every day was just learning, which was just amazing.
Listen to founders about their stories and how they built their startups. Here on Maharajas of Scale, with me, your host, Krishna Jonakadla, co-founder of Mango Mobile TV and Vouch.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Maharajas of Scale. Today we have Karthik from Jumbotail, a very interesting startup. Those people that actually follow segments and the Indian economy will agree to the fact that India is a largely unorganized country that actually needs to be organized. And Karthik and Ashish are doing their part through Jumbotail to actually make that happen. We will discover more about Jumbotail as we jump in. The second wave of the COVID pandemic, for those of you wanting to put a timestamp on this, has just ended. People are talking about the third wave coming on. And the funny thing is, during these lockdowns and the pandemics, people are actually discovering the advantages and the benefits of having somebody like Jumbotail. I'm sure Karthik will speak to more about that. Karthik, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Krishna. Thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. So, Karthik, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on right now.
I am Karthik. I am co-founder and CEO of Jumbotail. I co-founded Jumbotail along with my Stanford classmate Ashish Jinnah, and we graduated from the MBA class of Stanford 2011. Prior to Stanford, I served in the Indian Army for 10 years. I took voluntary retirement in the rank of major. I was in the infantry. I served in extreme hard combat zones, including Siachen Glacier, counterterrorism in Kashmir, and many difficult zones in Northeast. And then post that, as I was looking to think about my life, I always wanted to create a wide impact, and food was a very big problem statement that I wanted to solve, because the country was really largely dependent on agriculture, especially those days. 52% of population serving in the agri sector, and about 17 to 20% of our GDP being contributed very unorganized. So my initial start point was to create a very small, what eventually did not take off, kisanco.com, trying to connect coconut farmers with the end markets using SMS based technology. Did not really pan out, but a lot of learnings. The key learning being that this isn't a problem you can just simply connect two sides of the market with the technology platform and sit and watch and scale, right? This is even if you connect the two sides, how do you ship goods? There is no scalable way to shipping goods, and more importantly, I could figure out a way to send coconuts to Delhi, but how would the money come back? Where is the trust system, especially in a cash-based economy? And this is way back in 2008. So I decided to wait until the market develops. I wasn't really sure how long will it take, probably 10 years. But in the meantime, I also discovered that I was not competent enough to solve this problem. I came from the military, and I did not have any network, no business knowledge. Then I applied to business school. Some divine intelligence, I got admitted to Stanford, and that's when I met my co-founder Ashish. Post that, I kept continuing to enrich my thought process in a very systematic manner. I chose many things post my Stanford life to help me get to this day. Namely, I chose to join eBay to learn e-commerce, marketplaces, product, technology, and then I relocated back to India at the right time. Saw a huge, hockey stick growth in Flipkart. I was director of products at Flipkart, and then I learned how to hire, and all of these things helped me, get ready. And in 2015, late, just when the whole world was going gaga over hyperlocal commerce and also grocery direct to consumer e-commerce, we took a contrarian bet. Ashish and I said that the way to modernize grocery retail in India is not to displace and replace the mom and pop stores, and they were constituting nearly 95% of the unorganized or the entire trade, and they were all unorganized. We said that we have to include them. We have to build the technology what is required. Today it is very obvious. In 2015 it was not obvious at all. People had a lot of questions. It is pre-Jio, it is 2G, when 3G packs were not there. And then I took the famous quote from Paul Graham. I think he said, imagine 5 years from now, imagine a world and build what is missing. And we imagined a world in which Kirana stores are front and center of the retail ecosystem. And that's what is really happening right now.
Very interesting. You touched on a lot of points there. I'm going to jump into them. But elaborate a little more when you say you're putting the Kirana stores front and center. What's your model, and what is it that you are doing differently?
Yeah. So India's current retail grocery retail market is close to about $500 billion, of which nearly 95% of that, nearly $475 billion is flowing through these 10 to 12 million mom and pop Kirana stores. These people are largely unorganized. There are some of those people who will take like a little bit of capital, take a lot of risk, and invest and start a store. And primarily, the world thought at that time, and probably for a very long time, that they will be displaced by what the so-called modern trade that we see, like big box store experiences and supermarkets. But despite about 20 years of concerted effort, and I don't think any other reason, like capital, even internal Indian conglomerates were trying to set up those modern retail stores, and large companies came in, they could not succeed to make the economics work. And because the cost efficiency of the Kirana stores and the structural habits of the people. So Indian people want to buy very frequently. They don't have cars they can take to a large big box store and buy and come back. Transportation is a problem. They don't have large kitchens. Essentially, the mom and pop was doing two very important services. What business is he in? We didn't see him as a grocery person at all. We saw him as someone who's providing storeroom as a service for all the neighboring households. Whenever they want, they'll go, pick up, pay, and come back. And then they are providing shelf as a service for all the brands. And in between these two, they had huge issues on procurement, and they were always looking in the back. They were not able to focus on their customers, their consumers. They were all, the supply system and supply side of the things were very, very broken. They had hundreds of distribution relationships, hundreds of fintech financial relationships, not fintech. Distributors would give credit. Very, very unorganized sector. So what we said is that what constitutes a modern retail? Let's take that question and break that into first principles, and let's try to modernize this particular Kirana store at scale by offering them, each one of them, as individual bite-sized services that he can try, adapt, change. All other people who were even attempting to modernize the Kirana stores at that time were trivializing the solution to some point of sale software system. They said, okay, adopt a point of sale. But, his problems were far, far, far above any kind of, point of sale. So we said, okay, a modern retail system depends on very modern procurement and supply chain systems. It has to have guaranteed delivery. That's the number one. So you should not be looking backward. You should be looking forward to your consumers, your customers. Second, it should have financial systems that are digital, traceable, and also it is efficient. Cash was not an efficient system. And the whole country, on the other hand, consumers are also, moving towards digital ecosystem. And then somebody has to prepare these people. Third one is that, they need to have some amount of inventory management systems if they really want to. But even more than inventory management system, they need to have certain communication systems to their consumers through digital means. Right? There was no digital hook at all. Then the merchandising, the whole category management is a very big piece of the puzzle for any retail company, right? What items to keep, how to keep, which ones to place, what to price. There was no, these guys were taking all of their own decisions, and we needed a modern system for that. And finally, what we saw is that the millennials were choosing, a lot of them were choosing brands over unbranded items. This was a common trend. We really understood that, a lot of people attribute Kirana store's success to their low cost. I think that's not the case. I do not see that on the ground. I think the real reason why they actually succeeded is the deep relationships that they built. And these deep relationships were built over years because the catchment area population stayed pretty stable. They were not mobile. Our fathers, if you see, 10 years, 15 years in one location, right? That's not the case with the millennials. The millennials were just not having enough time and attention to build a relationship with the local grocer. And they were moving, every time they were moving, when they move into a new neighborhood, implicitly and through even other this thing also, we saw that they were making choices based on, is there a Domino's nearby? Is there a KFC nearby? Is there a coffee shop nearby? And that is how they were making choices, right? So now brand affiliation becomes more important. The Kirana did all the things right. There was a brand, but then the brand was not transferable. So we said that we have to have a brand, and that also is about modern. So we broke down into these things: a reliant, resilient supply chain system, a great category management, merchandising, financial products and accounting systems, inventory management, customer relationships, digital, that includes loyalty. Most modern retail chains would offer you loyalty, but the Kirana stores didn't have any loyalty. And then finally the brand. So we said, why don't we now, the whole puzzle needs to be resolved. You can't just go and give some software or, want to take a long-term, asset light model and all that stuff. We were not interested in that kind of thing. We want to fundamentally rethink, because our goal was to always be undisputed number one. We never, irrespective of what our current size and shape and whatever in the path that we have taken, we have never ever moved away from our vision of becoming the undisputed number one in the minds of our customers and in whatever measure that the world would measure in a reasonable long periods of time. We were not in a hurry. So if that is the case, then you got to go for deep solutions and focus. And that is the solution that we brought. That we are solving for the Kirana stores all of these pieces of puzzle through 4 pillars of Jumbotail. First is a marketplace. This connects the Kirana stores to the supplier ecosystem, and it is backed by our in-house tech-driven supply chain. We run our fulfillment centers, distribution centers. We do our last mile delivery to the storefront within 24 to 48 hours in a very, very reliable manner and very high fill rates. Like the industry fill rates are at about 60-65%. We are north of 95%. Because of our ability to do this, we come across as extremely reliable partners to the Kirana stores. If they want something tomorrow, they order in Jumbotail and we get it to them, no matter what. Then we overlay our fintech solution. So we have a fintech platform that connects lenders, multiple lenders who have the capital to lend. We create this entire tech-driven access to this market. So we help them underwrite, and then we deliver the financial services on top of our supply chain. Look, so for example, when we deliver the goods, based on the proof of delivery, we collect the proof of payment and post-dated checks, or NACH mandates and whatever is required. And then even further collections and stuff that happens is run on top of, because we already go to them. We already have these customers in our platform. So acquisition is not a problem, relationship is not a problem, credit delivery is not a problem, credit collection is not a problem, and we run that through unique model. That's taking care of the supply side solutions of the Kirana store. Now on the demand side, we help the Kiranas transform their stores into modern convenience retail stores through a unique partnership model, where we co-brand our J24 brand with the store brand of that Kirana store. The store brand doesn't go away. It's a co-branded model, and these transformation happens with very limited, whatever is required to spruce up the store. That's all. We don't want him to make, say, capital investments, and we provide him with the technology, with the retail operating system that has been custom built for chaotic situations for the Kirana stores and the grocery transactions. And then we help the Kirana store get omni-channel demand. We have integrated with Dunzo, we are integrating with other platforms at this point in time, and we have our own J24.store delivery network. We help them get omni-channel online demand, which is fulfilled by the store themselves in lightning fast time. Plus, it's all ubiquitous. It needs to be present across. It's densely located within the neighborhoods. It's an omni-channel store. So when the Kirana signs up for a J24 store, he gets to serve demands of three kinds. One is the walk-in, which he was always doing. Second is the home delivery through phone orders. So it's a very big channel even today. Customers would like to actually use phone as a medium or WhatsApp as a medium to place cryptic orders, and the Kirana store then transacts through that. And finally, there's a proper online ordering system as we understand. So this is the whole value proposition that we have.
Pretty interesting. Let's peel that a little bit and then go into a little more detail. So if I got that correctly, are you trying to improve the economics of the Kirana store owner? Or are you trying to standardize the experience that a potential customer or a real customer that gets from a normal Kirana store? There are some issues about the economic side of it, which is about how the cheapness of it. So are you trying to transform the economics for the Kirana store owners, or are you trying to fix the customer experience, or both?
See, if you take a suite of solutions that we have, starting from, if you look at a Kirana stores, you can come and use our services just to compare prices and then keep buying from wherever he wants. That's the starting point of the whole journey, right? You can just discover what's going on in the market and then still continue to have a buying relationship with somebody. All the way to a Kirana store that adopts our brand, the J24 brand. So the level of, you can say, pick and choose that you can do, all of these things will be impacted. So the first and foremost thing is, whatever he does, his economics have to improve. Dhanda badna hai. He has to increase his revenue, he has to increase his scale. Not necessarily scale, at least his profits. And he needs to, I think more important than economics and profit today is, I think, they are all going through some existential crisis in their own minds. Like in the world of online, where all consumers are going, in the world of everything is becoming modern, branded, digital. I'm no longer seeing the same faces for more than 6 months in a store. The people are ultra mobile. Now, where do I stand? Right now, he needs a sense of security, a mothership. He needs to anchor to a mothership at this particular point in time. So there is a solution on the economic side, there's a solution on the philosophical and the emotional side. But overall, whatever we do ultimately has to result in improved economics for him. Otherwise, why will he do it? That's the question.
Got it. When I meant economics, it was more than just the top line, because many solutions can actually improve the bottom line. But we'll come back to it. You said a lot of interesting things about your personal story, and I want to touch upon them. We'll come back to the model and the scale story in a bit. My God, I think this is the first time we've had more than 50 guests on our podcast, but we've never had a major before, especially the one from the armed forces. The funny thing is, I've done a lot of work for GE in the US, and it's one of the few organizations that has realized the methodical nature of people that come from the armed forces. So what GE used to do, and I think a lot of companies still do that to good measure, is staff a lot of senior operational leadership roles with people from the armed forces, majors, lieutenants, colonels, especially given their ability to actually sometimes go into unpredictable situations and manage large swaths of people, or even implement something that's actually that's actually written down into some sort of a standard. And I have seen some of these people. I've had the good fortune of actually working with one of them, a gentleman called Thomas Peck, who eventually went on to become the CIO of MGM Resorts, which was recently acquired. And I've seen the impact. This is the first time I've seen a major and somebody from the armed forces jump into the unpredictable world of startups. So I'm going to ask you in a second if you always had this dream of entrepreneurship. But then I think you touched upon it partly by, I guess, triggering Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you actually accomplished all the base desires, and then you're looking for self-actualization, and therefore the meaning part is what drove you to this. So help me understand a little. Have you always nurtured a dream of entrepreneurship, or was this just a way to deliver impact or meaning?
No, I come from family of government servants. To be honest, I had never imagined to be an entrepreneur, and I joined the military to serve the nation and create impact. And I wanted to do that much more faster, and I was impatient, and I wasn't willing to wait until I become a senior ranked officer to be able to create even wider and wider and wider impact. So I wanted to have certain inorganic inflection path to my impactful creation of impact. And I also realized during my 10 years in combat that war is a very poor way of doing things. Actually, it is more glorified. I didn't want India to be one of those countries that ever have to fight a war. People, the countries need to look at India and its economic potential, and then think 200 times before even starting a belligerent conversation. And in order to get to that state, you need to actually take our country to economic prosperity, and that is what I strongly believed in. I also saw how during my initial days the IT growth, and as a country we were becoming very, very important piece of the world puzzle in the global order, and I was getting a ringside view. And I really understood that in the war is just a means to an end. The end is security, and there are very different ways of achieving the same goal, and in a much more stable manner. And that's why I shifted to the path of creating economic prosperity to our country to take it to the next level. It is always impact and service to the nation.
Amazing. I can't believe I heard those words actually come out of your mouth. I have a slightly different point of view on wars and revolution. In fact, I do think that, of course, it's not my place to say. I was not even born back then. Everybody has got a fighting spirit. At some point in time, if you fought for something and you earned it, you know what it's worth. So in some sense, I believe the non-violent struggle that actually led, although we make it look like we actually fought for it, hundreds of countries actually got independence in the mid-40s. So they were a set of people that were there present to step in and then take charge, and we didn't go into chaos like Afghanistan is declining, sort of descending into right now with the exit of Western nations. So I think we should have had the right wars. Again, the reason why you fight certain wars become very important. They get etched in memory, and then you always remember why you fought and then what you fought for. So But the second part of what you said, I absolutely agree. And in fact, I think it's a very, very, very understood aspect, especially in India, that whatever drives even war is actually economics. There are a handful of people, that purely thrive on power, but power without the power of money is actually nothing. The biggest kingdoms on the planet, all the colonial imperial powers, all of them, they did it for gold, they did it for silver, that's just another representation of wealth. Somewhere along the way, and I keep saying this ad nauseum, especially on my podcast, we forgot what wealth is. We forgot what a nation is. We forgot the very concept of economics. And we are still suffering to this day. Because you can have 10 million soldiers in the army. The soldiers cannot eat nationalism. They cannot eat patriotism. Right? They have to eat food. And then you cannot consistently tell everyone to be a nationalist. It's a very economics. If you don't make economics work, especially somewhere along the way, the political ecosystem actually breaks down, which I think to a great extent, if not for 1991 liberalization, we would have possibly had much more anarchist chaos right now. So I'm glad you embarked on this path. But one question though, coming from a family of government servants, and at least there's one aspect of everything being regimented, right? So what happens in the armed forces, it's a certain generalization, and I'll apologize in advance for that. There's one place which actually tells you you've succeeded, which is school. They give you your certificate, they'll do a quarterly exam, they'll tell you you passed, you failed. And until you actually come out into the real world, you have this illusion of success. Because some teacher has told you, a piece of paper tells you that you've succeeded. In the armed forces, you largely have controlled experiments. But obviously, fighting in hot combat zones, I don't think a lot can be actually controlled. There are a lot of uncontrolled. But the general environment in which you work, there's regimentation, this is how you engage the enemy, this is the plan. Nobody goes rogue, right? So nobody goes rogue. Largely, while local plans might actually evolve and shift based on the conditions that you see, but there are certain regimentation. Stepping out of such a regimented or a predictable world and getting into entrepreneurship, did that bother you? I know you said, you touched upon the fact that you did not have a network and you were not yet competent. So therefore, to bridge that gap, is that what drove you to go to Stanford?
No, I never. Army is regimented for sure. I don't disagree with it, but I think fundamentally there are only two kinds of soldiers: the good and the dead. And if you want to be good, then you have to be innovative, especially in combat. So there is a lot of regimentation that you see, but it's a very the organization doesn't. It imposes only one thing on you, success, and at every stage, right? If you get caught, if you get, if you get a bullet, you are a martyr, you are dead at this point. So now, then the human mind thinks very, very creatively on how to survive. Now, in order to do that, then what is required is a good value system, because you can do anything to survive. Now, the regimentation takes care of creating the value system that you are always falling back on, or the boundaries, that this is our history, this is what we stand for, this is what we must do, this is how we must behave, we are not them, we are different, we treat women well, we don't plunder, we don't do all these things, right? So then it imposes these conditions. And now it has to be translated to 10, 15, 20 million or 10 million people, right? So now you have to, an army of, you have to really put the people there. I do not think that it actually constrains your thinking. Actually, especially for those of us who have served in the combat, we are very creative, because we have to survive that moment. We have to survive that moment. If this doesn't work, something else has to work, because we have to achieve those results. And even orders that come from top, sometimes some of them, the regimentation forces you to actually be so creative in order to get that order done, right? So I think it's a mixed world. I did not see that. Network, definitely yes. I did not know how to run a business for sure, and I did not have any friends. So I did not have any network, and if I would have not met Ashish, I don't think Jumbotail would have been possible. There is no other person. I know there is no counterfactual, but I can tell you there is no other person. I have been searching for a full solution for nearly 10 years before the first line of code was written, and Ashish is the perfect person to be the co-founder. I would have not found him because he comes from a family of farmers.
Interesting.
He's an apple farmer himself, and he went and his journey is very illustrious, more illustrious than what you can possibly see. So I think getting that network was very important for me.
So what drove you to Stanford then? And was this an on in the Stanford campus?
Yeah, that's right.
Or was
it's a
it
2-year
remote
full-time
program?
MBA program.
Awesome. And what drove you to Stanford?
I wanted to learn from the superset. I did not think I can learn, and more importantly, the admission system for an MBA program in India was heavily weighted against older students. So it was morely people coming out within 1 or 2 years, and I was already 10 years after my graduation. I had served for 10 years in the military, so it wasn't the best solution for us. In fact, actually, I think that if you have more than 5-7 years of experience, you get like negative marks on that. So it wasn't the best solution for me.
Interesting. In fact, in a way, the format is not practically driven either. So to a great extent, it's mostly about conceptual depth. But it's the alumni and the network that the alumni has got into that actually keeps it alive as far as the Indian ecosystem is concerned. So that's where you met Ashish in the Stanford program.
He was my classmate.
Interesting. And then how did the two of you was there a wavelength match? Were you taking the same classes? How did you decide that the two of you were going to team up and then do Jumbotail?
See, I think I was toying around with the idea for a long time. I need to find people, and I had been talking to a few people, understanding. So to me, the more important, I think wavelength is a subset of it. The value system match is very important, and I tend to evaluate people based on the choices that they have made, because words are cheap, right? So I saw this. Ashish was there. First of all, he came from a family of farmers, and he was very deeply connected to the farming problem statements. But if you look at it, he was the first person to in the IIT Delhi batch. He's a graduate of IIT Delhi first, and then he went to BCG. So when you think about the big four consultants, you think about all these airlines and people roaming around, all these roaming with the CEOs and trying to be the presentation junkies, right? Those are some of the images. Very brilliant people. Nothing to talk about them less, but the world that non-consultants generally have this, right? But Ashish, if you actually take a look, he actually worked on solving the public distribution problem for India. The projects that he actually worked on, some of them is introducing biometrics. So it became eventually the bedrock for Aadhaar. So biometrics for public distribution system. And he's been, the project was conceived by, I think, the World Food Program to help Indian government plug the leakages in the public distribution system. So he would sit in a truck, travel all through Bihar to Odisha to find out what all is happening in the truck. And that's how. So, when you make those kind of choices, when you could have made so many different kind of other choices, then the fact that, okay, he really means this is very important, right? And to me, this is a very long journey. It's a perseverance is the name of the game. And times are very difficult. And when times are very difficult, if you don't have a very, very, very strong connection to the problem statement, then you tend to make suboptimal choices that can cost the future. So for me, I think selecting that person who has demonstrated those, even at Stanford, we all went to some global study trip. I went to Peru. He was solving water sanitization problem in California, and he was very deeply connected to this kind of better farming and water and these kind of problems. He co-founded a startup that helps people know when the water is going to come in their public taps. So these are kind of things that when I saw him, then naturally, and then right before, so after Stanford, we sort of went our own ways. But after about nearly 3 years, he was actually, doing his own farming for nearly a year and a half. And he was trying to organize the farmers. Whatever I was doing in 2008, he was trying to do in Himachal. And he reconnected with me. And I had done a project at Stanford on this coconut supply chain from farm to fork under a very world-famous professor, Hawley. And he wanted to know what was the finding of that research study. So then we reconnected, then we re-engaged, and then we are here.
I see. Talk a little more about that coconut SMS-based solution, why it didn't succeed, and what lessons you learned from that.
No, it was way too early, first of all. So it's a Nokia SMS-based, Nokia N70 was the smartest phone those days, and SMS is short code API-based solutions. The reason why it didn't succeed is because, that solution was trying to tell people who are the buyers for your produce and what are the prices. You can transmit your prices, they can ask for prices. But you connect these two. After that, how will the transaction complete? So somebody got to ship your product, right? In the US, in Amazon or eBay, once the transaction is completed, the flow, see, every commerce flow, first principles, let's break it down. It has three functions, three flows. First is the information flow. What's the product, who's selling it, what's the price, when is it going to be available on. Then it's the material flow. Once the transaction, you place an order, then it's the material flow. Material has to move. Then the financial flow, money has to move. If you go to a counter shop, and the Kirana store is happening right in front of you, this guy standing, all three flows happen in one movement, and you don't really piece it down. In US, in Amazon, you order in Amazon, FedEx delivers you pay via Visa, right? If you in India, all three done is by Flipkart. You order in Flipkart, Flipkart delivers you do cash on delivery to Flipkart guys. So they did all the three. So you have to do all the three in order to make it successful. So it was just too big problem. I didn't know how to solve it. I frankly did not know. You were talking about, I didn't even know the word called scale at that time. My jargons were all military, and I didn't even know the simple word called scale. Scale is a word that I went to Stanford and I actually encountered it first.
Okay. And then that's when you both decided. So talk about the early days. So then,
no, early days is all early 2015, late 2000. So in Stanford, we didn't discuss much. And when 2015, 2014 December, one of our friends' wedding, classmates' wedding, we again reconnected, and then we started discussing. At that time, I was more concrete about what we want to do. Then we started, discussing. We spent about 6 months just brainstorming, ideating, talking to people. Those days I was in Flipkart at that time. So, and then we idea pivoted 2-3 times within our own as we learned more from our customers. Then eventually we took a plunge in late December 2015 and started the operations in April 2016.
So these 2015, around that frame was when time frame was when people like Grofers, Big Basket, all of these guys were taking off. And you touched upon this earlier when you spoke about the fact that you were taking a contrarian bet. And so here's what I've always felt. I come from a community of businessmen, the Vaishyas or the Banyas. And I have had an uncle myself who used to run a Kirana store. And the economics of the Kirana store is many of them don't even track if they are making a profit or a loss. because all the money is actually coming from the cash box. So if you need to pay rent, you draw it from the cash box. If you need groceries, you don't need to go anywhere else because you're running a kirana store yourself. And many of these have inefficient supply side economics as well, because what they're doing is they buy maybe a 200 square foot or rent a 200 square foot space and have a series of storage containers. And I'm talking about this 30 years ago. You have way more branded products and pre-packaged products today than what we used to have 30 years ago. And most of it is actually stored in large bins. Your provisions, your grains, your pulses, your cereals, all of them are stored. And you would package them and then send it. And every afternoon you would go to the local neighborhood market to actually replenish the ones that you actually exhausted, and maybe go to a little farther, which is a larger market, to actually source some of the other items that are not available locally. So the net effect is that your margins are not that great, but it actually keeps the kitchen running. And the reason the margins are not that great, but the kitchen actually keeps running, is because the whole family is working on it. The business, the husband is working, the wife is working. If there is a grown child past maybe even under the legal age, that child is also working, and none of them actually draw a salary, right? So none of them draw a salary. Nobody accounts for that salary. And an added aspect to that is some of the financially prudent ones have actually repaid their loans that they were either taken from the local money lender or from their father-in-law or whoever their relatives are, and they've stepped out of that. And even today, a prevalent practice exists, which is called as the pygmy, pygmy money savers, right? So there is a man that drives up in a TVS 50 or a moped. He or she is, because they know that if they do not consciously save money on a regular basis, they will never be left with anything. So they've agreed on a daily recurring investment of 400 rupees or 500 rupees, which amounts to about 15,000 per month. And that's really their source of saving. And but to my mind, it's mostly a convenience play, which you actually spoke about. And when you said it's actually storeroom as a service, I've never heard anybody describe it that way, and I think that's fantastic. I think that's going to stick in my mind for some time now. And the 20 odd years, the real reason this industry hasn't organized, I think, is not this is my personal opinion anyway, is not because the economics don't work, is because of a set of interests have long resisted direct FDI in retail. They have stymied every move from the large big box retailers from actually coming, because scores of constituents are going to face economic disruption for a short period of time. The way I contrast it is, and not that the big box retailer related formats have actually solved the problem in some form or fashion, because we have a perverse set of labor laws which actually make it so draconian for any of them to really employ and then hire or fire. So you look at an average Metro Cash and Carry. Metro Cash and Carry sells only to businesses because you have this law in FDI which says that multi-brand retail, especially if it is retail to end consumers, is not allowed in the country. So therefore, the German Metro Cash and Carry giant started operations in the early 2000s, and they started selling only to businesses. And now you realize that a lot of people just want to get a business ID to go and get stuff from Metro Cash and Carry because it gets them access. In a way, it is circumventing the rules, right? But the question is, there are people who work as cashiers in Metro, they're pickers, they're stockers, they're organizers. They possibly have a slightly better quality of life than what they would otherwise have in the Kirana store. They possibly have access to group health insurance, which I honestly have to admit I'm not aware if they have. Maybe some sort of workman's compensation. But labor laws have created a situation in such a way that even if an average Metro Cash and Carry store employs about 2,000 people, in that perhaps 90% of them are actually contract labor. to actually circumvent your large labor law regulations. So the only reason a sense of chaos actually persists in the country is because of a perverse set of economic policies that are just designed to keep things the way they are. Because solving some of these would mean that there is some degree of disruption because none of them want to deal with it. And that would also mean that upsetting the public distribution system apple cart, right? So some time ago, a friend of mine who works in the Karnataka government said that in 1 year alone, they had cancelled close to 2 lakh ration cards. Now, saying that they were fake ration cards, not even people that are eligible, forget whether they are below poverty line, above poverty line. These are fake ration cards. What it means is that there is large scale money that is being siphoned off from the system. So now, as soon as you embark with a series of economic policies to organize this system, it is going to result in 4 or 5 years of disruption. When I used to live in the US, I lived there for more than a decade. I used to loathe the fact that if I have to go to a Walgreens, which is a pharmacy, just to buy a can of milk, I have to go all the way to the back of the store. And the reason milk is designed to be placed in the back of the store is that you would walk all the way through the store, and then some of the items that are placed on the aisle would entice you. So instead of spending maybe $2 or $3 for that gallon of milk, you would actually spend $30 just because they managed to get you into the store. Now, the average Kirana store actually doesn't work with that economics at all. The average Kirana store is, I want milk, I go to the store, actually pick up that packet of milk and then come back. So it's a convenience play. So I think the reason it has not worked is because of this. And you have from Bajrang Dal to Swadeshi Jagran Manch to the Congress Party to BJP, a wide variety of actors benefit from the system staying this way, which is why it hasn't organized. So that brings me to the question, which is, now you are going to be a catalyst in actually organizing this, in transforming some of these aspects. So therefore, how do you expect to succeed, and why do you expect your model to succeed?
So I while all the things that are what you said is true, very, very powerful observations on a life of a Kirana store. Very deep observations. I must compliment you. This is how they live. There is no concept of profit. It's all cash box, and then they do some kind of daily savings. Everybody works, whosoever is able to put a helping hand here and there, and that's how they are surviving. And everybody is like making probably 15,000-20,000 rupees per month, and that's all they do. So I agree to that fact. I think that the more important, there are some elements of things that even though you touched upon, labor laws, yes, there is some economics out there, but it's not unsolvable. There is enough economics to put organized labor, and we are figuring out how to do that within a Kirana store. Some observations, right? Contract laborers, I do not believe that because you are having contract labor, you are able to circumvent any labor law. In fact, actually, labor law is equally enforced whether you have own employees or contract labor. The contract labor, there's good amount of churn in this segment. People come and people leave, and therefore, so these people are all employed. They are not like your variable model, like your Swiggy or your taxi drivers, where if you get orders today, you get some commission and things like that. These are all like the ones that you give example on Metro Cash and Carry. Even though they could be on somebody else's payroll as contract workers, they are absolutely Indian government laws mandated, and I don't think any organized player in this country would be found not paying the PF or gratuity or all of these things. Like there are certain structural issues. I agree, but I don't think that is actually causing any issue or any kind of problems to the organized player. The real problem.
But Karthik, there is 90. If you really see the contributors to gratuity and PF, it's literally under 10%. It is actually in single digits. The remaining 90%.
No, but so, I'm pretty sure that Metro Cash and Carry or any other organized players.
No, I just gave that as an example. What I meant is, because of although the labor code is being reorganized into 4 separate groups, which is mostly a reorganization, which is not rewriting. So when you have, for example, the Industrial Disputes Act of 1949, which actually says that if you have, I think the number has been revised in the new labor code, which is if you have any more than 100 workers in a particular establishment, you cannot fire them for whatever odd reason, and you need the permission of the government. Now, I'm not able to TeamLease, Manish Sabharwal, who actually runs TeamLease, supplies these thousands of temp staff workers to other companies, the likes of Metro Cash and Carry. Right. So, for instance, so I don't know if Metro Cash and Carry is a customer of TeamLease, but I know TeamLease plays that role, and there are a lot of companies that actually do that. The fundamental reason these players even exist is because of the need of these organizations not to circumvent, but to actually control their own economic destiny. Because what you don't want to, let's take COVID as an example. All of a sudden, COVID has hit, your revenues, in many cases, in many sectors, revenues actually literally dropped to zero. Most people factor in a 20-30% variation in revenues. Nobody factors in a zero revenue. Now, when you have to adjust your economic model to that by actually pruning your staff, right? So, if the policy framework actually ostracizes you, which is why you need some of these players. Now, these players have found out a model in which you can actually comply with the law, somehow keep all those balls juggling in the air, right? What I'm actually meaning is, if Metro Cash and Carry employed 2,000 people, and those 2,000 people became part of the Metro Cash and Carry family, the benefits that they would enjoy, the 15-20% cut otherwise the vendor like TeamLease would actually take, would actually end up in the pockets of these people. So there is a whole host of economic incentives. But anyway, I'll let you continue. We are not discussing that model, but we'll come back.
My view is that the real problem is one of the problems of modern retail in India is one of the whole idea that you have to have a 5,000 to 10,000 square feet space right in the heart of various pockets of the city and then have them operate profitably. I don't think that it's a labor. Yes, that 15% of labor is the real cost, and I think whatever reason why they are maintaining or not maintaining, but that's added cost. But that said, the real actual cost is the lack of efficiencies of scale of the supply chain as they understand, right? So the roads are small. Now you have rent cost. Rent cost in India is increasing with contiguous spaces, larger spaces. So the same neighborhood, same street, a 200 square feet, which is not useful to anybody. Only a grocer will come and take it. But a 5,000 square feet is attractive for offices. It's attractive for many different businesses. So the rent actually goes up. Now you have to put your security card. You have to put your this thing. You need to have certain structures where your vehicles can come in the behind and go in the front, and all of those things that are available in the Western world are not available here. Now that is not the real problem. I'll tell you the structural problem that exists in India is called MRP. This is called maximum retail price. Okay. Now, for the very same product, I have to incur all the cost. Now a Kirana store is able to charge all the way till MRP. So let's check out all this positioning. Let's say a Kirana store, but then he doesn't incur the cost of AC, the security guard in front, the people. Now, if you put a 5,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet, you have to have an office, you have to have some store, you have to have some 15 people, right? The whole model of I am going to build a 5,000, 10,000 square feet modern retail point in the heart of the city, pay the increasing, escalating real estate cost, and then not be able to service with a larger truck supply. I still have to come in smaller trucks because roads are small, right? And I have to build a DC of somewhere outside the city, and then I have to come and deliver. That is the economic model that doesn't work out. It is not for FDI and all of those things. I can tell you, you remove FDI, okay, you allow all people to come and invest in this country. I am telling you, still the Kirana will win, and that is because basically you can think of a 5,000 square feet store get broken into 10 500 square feet small counters, and they are all located very close to the consumer. Consumer comes in, zips in. You don't have to entice the consumer to buy more. The Kirana's economics are already making it work. His revenue per square feet is higher than your more. Okay, we are not.
I agree. I'm glad you brought up the infrastructure part. I wanted to cover it, but I didn't cover it. Infrastructure is one more ingredient in the dish that you cook to actually keep things the same, right? So, awesome. So let's jump into the initial scale story. I think we've covered quite a bit of what you are changing. I want to be cautious of your time as well. So once you launched in 2016, talk about those initial days. This is a pretty popular format, and how did you convert the first store? What were some of the initial things that you worked on? When did you realize that you really had a game on hand?
See, the first store is my own grocery store, Mamta store. So Mamta is my first customer.
I see.
So I went and told him
that
I will send you by WhatsApp. So and like few products he had certain issues going to the main market in Yeshwanthpur. I said we'll give you and then we'll deliver it to you. The first delivery vehicle was my car, and then so we were ideating. One day, Ashish and I decided enough of ideation. It was September 2015. We said, let's send out a WhatsApp message and let's take action. Let's take the first step. We were only curious to find two things. First is, those days, today it is not prevalent anymore. If you look at those days, right, people used to switch on and off the mobile data button, the double arrow button that is there. Whenever they want, they used to switch on. And then as soon as their internet need is over, they will switch off. So we said, whenever if it is off, then your WhatsApp second tick will not come. The second tick is delivery, so he has to switch on. I said, okay, let's do one thing. Let's see what is the average time taken between the first tick and the second tick, and then 2 ticks and blue tick. So the time between delivery and read. This is what we wanted to test. So we sent a message at around 10:40 in the night, and then 10:43 we got order. So and it turns out that generally these Kirana stores close the shop at around 10:15, go back and do something with their internet, and then this gentleman gave me an order, and I was personally, he wanted to support me, and then we delivered. So we got first five customers like this only, all of them on WhatsApp, and then we used to send them some catalog, and then we used to get some orders, and then we used to go and deliver the next day and collect cash for a very good period of about 1.5 2 months. In fact, actually up to January, my car was the delivery vehicle. So for every day we used to go pick up and then deliver. But after that we hired one vehicle, and then we had more than five customers plus another five more by around January. All these are very initial pilot stages. And April is when we launched the app in a full-fledged manner and started onboarding more customers.
And the app allowed the Kirana stores to place bulk orders of products that they would actually retail in their stores.
Yeah, so it just allowed them to place some orders. They will order more quantities, so therefore they'll do bulk orders.
Okay, and then when did the POS aspect and the supply chain and the fintech aspects come?
Supply chain was right from day one. On day one, supply chain is very we were clear that we have to build a supply chain, because that was the learning that we both had. Ashish had come to similar conclusions during his farming stage. He was trying to organize the apple farmers. He aggregated all the apple farmers, but again, same problems. Right? We were very clear that we will build out the supply chain. So from day one, our investments in supply chain started. Credit came about 6, 8, 9 months back later, and it was also sort of imposed upon us when the demonetization crisis happened. And suddenly overnight there was no cash with the Kirana stores and everything was digital with them for about 2 months period. So we had to start lending, and we were already piloting. So 3-4 months ago itself we were piloting the credit, and we had initial set of customers, but we accelerated that. And then the point of sale and the demand side solutions came way later in 2017 November, and I presented a few thought process, and then later on it came around that.
How many Kirana stores do you have on your platform today?
I think we have about 50,000 kirana stores directly being served, and we have a different model of serving another 30,000-40,000 kirana stores through in the tier 3, tier 4 towns. So we are touching about 80,000 stores today.
So talk about some inflection points. So the first 5, out of your car, which was the supply vehicle, and then you launched the app in April 2016.
Right.
And talk about when you got the first 10, first 25, and what were some of the tactics that you tried, and what were some of the things that worked for you?
See, initially up to first 500, it was a slow, first 200-300. It was a daily acquisition. We used to go talk to customers because it was very early days in 2015, 2016. And we were pioneers of this idea in the first place. Right? Everybody was betting on the B2C. And then infrastructure was a challenge. Many customers would not have WhatsApp to order, mobile pack to order. So they used to call our call center, and then they used to tell us that please take order via phone. So we never took order via phone. Till date, we don't have a sales force. So that's one of the hallmarks of our model.
Okay.
Right? So we told them we will recharge you. So we used to actually run a recharge service. So they used to call us. So we used to put money through Paytm and recharge their phone. And then we'll collect the recharge amount from there when we go and do the delivery. So that also became a very good service for them. So our very good initial, this used to happen a lot. So people used to call us, and then we became probably the primary easy contact point for recharging. So they used to call us and say, please put this 50 rupees recharge kar do. So we used to put 50 rupees, and then delivery boy will go and collect. We built a product for it. He has to, delivery boy needs to know that you have to collect this 50 rupees from him. So we were doing all of that stuff. So that's how the initial one. Then finally, we said we were ready, and our basic product and supply side product. The next inflection point is we are a marketplace. So we had sellers and we had buyers. So the seller products were all ready, and we had sellers on the platform who could actually digitally transact on our platform. And at that time, we started scaling. And then we kept scaling through the platform. And then about 6 months later, we were about 3,000 customers. And then ever since, we are growing.
So the app launches, the app has some a catalog of products, and these are mostly branded or unbranded?
Branded, and we created catalogs for, there's nothing called in India called unbranded. So you have names, you have photographs, you have a sack,
right.
You have a package. So we created catalog for all
right. Okay, and that was available. And so the initial modus operandi or the tactic was talk to them directly, canvas, and then eventually you start. When did it at some point in time, because you don't have a sales force, which means was there some sort of network effects that kicked in, which is these 200-300 stores realize that, hey, you know what, for my turnover of 2 lakhs or 3 lakhs this month, 1,50,000 is actually coming through Jumbo Tail, or I used to do it from the local market. What used to cost me 1,50,000 right now, because of the reliability that Jumbo Tail offers and the prices that Jumbo Tail offers, I'm actually saving 10,000. So I get two things out of it. One is the replenishment is faster and the prices, are better. Was that the kind of dialogue that happened? And then therefore the 300 created organic growth? Because if you didn't have a sales force, I'm actually a little intrigued how you hit the next numbers.
No, yeah, you are right. We never could offer prices also. We were the highest priced of all the places. So we were not discounting at any time. So we were, of all the people, we were highest priced.
Okay.
Because of another insight we got from the customer, that most of our customers are optimizing for revenue, not profits. Even though they want to claim that they are optimizing for profits, but they are actually optimizing for revenue. And to that, what it meant was, because of the thing that you brought out, right? Cash in the bank, cash in that cash counter. And cash in cash counter will go low, right, if you have no products in your shelf. So when a distributor would not come, when they can't go to the retailer, they can't go to the main market, they're out of stock in the shelf, right? When the customer comes, they don't want to send the customer empty-handed. No Kirana wants to send the customer empty-handed. He has to put some product in that particular basket. So they would just buy from us. They would not buy all the quantity. So they will not buy, there was an argument that if you give a great prices, you can buy the entire week's purchase. We were okay, we didn't want to discount. First of all, I came from a very, very discounting, culture in Flipkart. And I was saying that 100% there is no future for such kind of business models. And you can scale very fast and all those things. At some point, somebody can buy you, but you are basically building something to sell. So, if you want to really go public and all, you need to have a proper economic model. At least your thought process should be very clear. So in that sense, that was at least my thought process. So in that sense, we never used to discount. So therefore, we were always higher priced. But the second aspect is the reliability. Because we were very reliable, so we used to get business. And then also third one is customer service. There was no concept of customer service. If you look at 2016, there was no single service, a Kirana store, a person of that stature could actually call and receive a service. If you look at all the airline, like he didn't have any digital experiences, first of all. Second is the only thing is the phone, the whatever Vodafone, those days, those companies existed, Hutch and all of those things, right? So you could call them, but since you are prepaid customers, there was no concept of service for the prepaid customers. Okay. It was all very, very self-serve and all. Here he could actually talk to a real person. He got like service. He could tell, "Mere ko abhi jaldi delivery chahiye. Tomorrow, please give me delivery. Can you give me that product, this product?" And we were building entire trust based on that. Like, when he calls his phone, we were optimizing for metrics like how many rings you have to pick up the phone. Those were tracked. Extremely important for us, right? You can't let anybody, go to this thing. For example, recharge service, something that I told you. Another thing we innovated on returns, right? They had a lot of problems on these returns. When we buy a sack of rice, they used to go and buy say 10-20 bags of rice. They will come back to the store and discover that for 4 bag mein, this worm and other things are there. Now, yes, vendor can technically take a return, but you have to lug it back to the yard, which is 30-40 kilometers away, and you have to do it like next time when you go. Your capital is blocked. You can't sell it. Yahan pe, immediate return.
Right.
We took half bag returns, half used bag returns. So when you build things that is required, because his customer gave him back half bag return. His customer will take a full bag, and then in the middle of the bag, he will discover there are some small lumps of worms or whatever, and then he will come back to the Kirana store and return it. Now where will he go with that product? We solved all the problems. We solved all these problems. He said, "We are not going to give discount. No discount. No, I will be the highest priced. But I will save you from all of your losses. There will be no revenue loss for you. Your customer will never go empty-handed if you order in Jumbo Tail. You can always have a good service." So we treated him like a king, true king.
Got it. When you can give him his top line, let him worry about the bottom line.
He will figure it out. Like I will tell you that sometimes we used to deliver, he used to call us. And then by the time he will tell, "Sir, I removed that, few things and I sold it already. Don't worry, you come back." He was very happy. So very entrepreneurial guy. And second thing is, consumer, you have to go and find where the consumer is. First of all, they're all living in, small pockets of houses, housing societies and all. Delivery. For us, delivery was a breeze. This guy is sitting throughout the day in the store, which is on the roadside.
Right.
So supply chain costs are low.
Yeah.
He doesn't return. He's building a relationship with you. It was heaven. He's a great guy to build business.
Your truck
with.
or your auto can pull up right in front of the store.
You can
just
give
deliver
it
in bulk.
If you do something wrong, you can go and talk to him, and you can get him back. You don't have to give again money. Few minutes of decent conversation is good enough for him to get him back to the platform.
Got it. Awesome. You prioritize for value and reliability, and I think those look intangible, but the enormous impact that they can have on the bottom line can only be felt. It is not immediately evident.
I think there was some quote I used to read long back. The bad taste the poor taste of a bad quality product and service stays lot longer than the happiness you get buying something cheap. So we have realized, and this insight we got from a hotelier. He said, I asked him, "Sir, 20 rupees, this, I'll give you less price." He said, "I don't want urad dal 20 rupees less price." He's saying, because if you don't come with the urad dal on that day, I can't sell vada to my customer, and I will make a loss because he's having a 60-70% markup on the cost of food and then selling the vada. So he's not only losing the cost of that thing, but also the upside of the customer. He's not going to come back. So they are very clear. They were always optimizing for him. This is what we learned. So we said, build a reliable supply chain.
So value and top line focus and reliability. I'm actually super amazed at the fact that how long did it take. So let me go back to the fact that you had something like this in your mind for 10 long years. I know the contours of what you eventually put in place evolved because you yourself talked about the pivots that you went through. But at what point in time did you discover that this reliability, because there are two questions actually popped up in my mind. One is, how long did you have this concept? Second one, coming from Flipkart, which was in effect a last man standing kind of a model, right? So let's just discount our way as long as we are buying the market, we are buying future consumers. There are all sorts of labels on that particular model. To a certain extent, you were steeped in that philosophy, right? I don't know at what point you worked at Flipkart to develop a degree of skepticism.
No. I would say that I would correct here. It is absolutely true that Flipkart use price as a mechanism to attract customers, but Flipkart invested heavily in tech and supply chain. They were the first ones to solve for cost for cash on delivery. They were the first ones to solve for reliable supply chain. They actually invested, right? There are many players who today are not in the face of this earth, and they are the people who actually only discounted and they never invested any of their money. Flipkart did both, right? Flipkart did both. That's what I would say. And they were able to do. And let me tell you that, right? Every single time when you reduce the cost to the customer, demand will increase. But if you're not able to increase the demand, if you're not able to serve the demand, if you don't have a reliable supply chain, how will you actually grow? So it's a myth, right? Unless you have the supply chain, customers actually won't come. Even my case also, and I think consumers also. If you order something and if it doesn't even come to you in a reliable manner, even if you give 100 rupee discount next time, why will you come? So I learned that from Flipkart. Like, I think the importance of, I had already learned in eBay when I was in the US that eBay was like fighting a losing battle against Amazon. And Amazon was upping the game, 2-day delivery. Today there are 2-hour delivery or something like that. And, and eBay was like, eBay had fast and free shipping and it was 4 days. Right? There was no way you could actually compete against that might of the fast supply chain, instant gratification, right? So I was clear from that time that having a reliable supply chain is very important.
So that's where the foundational aspect on let's bet on reliability
and
actually
speed
came in. And got it.
Yeah, reliability and speed. Okay. Because I have seen in Flipkart, when your delivery windows are long, you get a lot of returns. I've seen that data, and that also informed me that speed is very, very important.
Very interesting. When delivery windows are long, returns are greater.
Yeah. Because customers have changed their mind.
Would you say returns or cancellations?
Returns. Customer would not even mind cancelling. He will just say, I don't want this item after you reach there. Some customers are, they would go and take the effort of cancelling and all. Otherwise, he will just say, he will not even come to pick up the item in a cash on delivery.
Right. He won't just show up. Right. Interesting. So then let's go back onto the scale journey. So you have, so that whole conversation, when did it sort of, if you didn't have a sales force, and which you still don't have, and I'll come to the J24 store format in a second when you actually start.
So that has a proper business development team because it requires that level of effort. The J24 has a proper business development team. Yeah.
No, I want to talk about the format and why you actually decided to start it. I'm sure you want to give that level of standardization that comes from the J24 label to the customers. But then, what drove it from 3,000 to 50,000? If you don't have a sales force, and how did the Kiranas end up coming to Jumbotail? Is it word of mouth amongst the Kiranas themselves that you were, Jumbotail was the company that was actually changing, touching a minuscule part of their lives, and therefore they were talking amongst each other. And then there is also another aspect of competitiveness, right? So two Kiranas in the same neighborhood may not actually, recommend Jumbotail. Two Kiranas in two separate neighborhoods who are not competing with each other, because in some sense, some of these are zero-sum game, right? So if I improve my economics, if I have a little more reliability, I'll do more business. So how did that happen? That growth happen? Talk about what worked for you there.
Yeah. So let me qualify. A sales force does two things, right? Acquire customers and then go and keep taking orders. That's a sales force job. Like your revenue. Let's say today, if you in this month, if you've sold, let's say 100 crores of products, and all of how much of that is coming from somebody physically visiting to the shop and taking orders, right? That's a sales force. That's definitely is we don't have. There is a aspect of app installation. So each and every customer requires to install the app. It's about a 6 to 8 minute process if the customer is having a phone. So that we have different models of going and installing the app to a basic setup. Initially in Bangalore, what we initially did was we just installed the app with the first 1,000 customers, like 2,000 customers. After that, they will install. Then what we did was, because supply chain is very important and we didn't want to actually run a loss-making business, so we were very clear on surgical customer installation acquisition. So we had a team of about 3-4 people who would be like we used to do that, like it would be like a ink sprinkled in a map of Bangalore. So that is how the customer will be there. Now you have to make it like completely blue, right? So now we'll say, okay, in that orders are coming from this pocket, let's go into those streets and just install whoever is having an Android phone, because there's a cost of installation is pretty much zero. He can buy order, there is no sales involved here. He can just say order hai aapko. And then whenever we went there, what we saw was everybody was already aware of Jumbo Tail from their friends and family, even the people, so they were aware. So we say, okay, aap dal ke jao. So you are just basically helping them. The only reason why that is also required is because in order to download app, you need a Play Store, and Play Store requires email ID. All of those things were there. These guys used to go and buy the phone, and the person who is actually selling the phone actually installs everything and give, including some default email ID and including a Play Store activation. They actually sideload many apps and give them. In fact, if you actually look at the phone sales techniques, these people go to these local mobile shops because they will give you all. They'll sideload some movies and give sideload and give, because if you buy from Flipkart, you have to do all your installation. These are the single pitches for them. So many times we realize that these people are not even aware about what email ID was used to register for the Play Store. So we had to go and help them with even such basic stuff, and that is how we have done. But once the app is installed, right, after that, there is no contact. It's all that is one of the biggest complaints our customers have. Sir, I am giving you ₹1 lakh of business a month, and you have never even sent a human being to me. And that's something that we are trying to address right now, at least for top customers, if there's any account management that is required and all that stuff. But these guys have just grown on their own, and we have just only invested in making the app easier and easier and easier.
Interesting. Amazing. I'm glad you touched upon it. And then this brought in the first 3,000, 10,000, or this is something that has already taken
no, about I think so about first 20
scale.
Up to first 15 to 20, 15,000 or so would come. And then the lateral expansion started. So now we are expanding to all the cities, right? So different cities.
Okay.
We are present in all the cities now, major cities in the country. So now each of these are all laterally expanding. So whatever happened in Bangalore 2016, 2017 is now getting repeated in all of those places. And now we are looking at much way of faster customer acquisition. The reason because there is enough people in the ecosystem who have installed payment apps in all of these merchants. So there are third-party agencies who can just simply help you go and install your app also for a small charge, and you can inorganically scale your network. They are pitching to us that they can do it for us. We have never used them so far. So why should you pay for customer acquisition when the customers are naturally coming to your platform? So we don't want to do that. But
Sure.
These people come and say we already have the databases and we can do all of those things. Yeah, we haven't tried any of them yet at this point.
Amazing. Karthik, I think I'm a fan of what you guys are doing, and I think you're playing the long game here. To be honest, because you're actually doing the grunt work of organizing. Let me ask you this, because there's a certain degree of scale that you achieved. 50,000 is no mean number. In the grand scheme of things, when you have 10-12 million Kirana stores across the country, 50,000 feels like a drop in the bucket. But even at 50,000, there is some, and I'm using this choice of words very carefully, muscle you have acquired, right? Which means there are some produce and some brands that you've been able to streamline. You actually bring, in some sense, play God, or be a market maker, right? For some of them, has that happened yet? Where you're starting to see different tastes in different neighborhoods. You're starting to see, so for instance, let's say you're serving, let's say for example in Bangalore, the northern Bangalore, or a little more of the cosmopolitan neighborhoods, and you are seeing that some products are not being stocked by the retailers, and therefore you can approach a certain brand and say, hey, I think you will serve well here. So is it too early, or have you started seeing some of those things happen already?
No, so it's not too early. We have our category management teams work with all the brands in joint business plan and arrive at helping them sell more effectively. But one thing that we are extremely careful about is we are the guardians of our customers' data. So there's no question of sharing information to the brands in ways.
Oh no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
So for instance, let's say there is a cereal brand called Yoga Bars, and then Yoga Bars is present only in a handful of let's say kiranas.
Right.
And with your data, you can definitely say, hey, Yoga Bars, you are going to benefit.
That's right.
Jumbo Tail can actually put in another 500 stores, and therefore Yoga Bars works with you. You're not passing on any data, you're just giving them insights of
that's right. So democratically, every seller, every brand gets access to the opportunity to plan their business in our platform. We have capabilities to share the insight. First of all, generate the insights. We generate billions of data points on transactions, on touches, and even supply chain, and waiting times, and who's good customer, bad customer. So many different things, not just around product. The second one is that the brands have certain goals. Some brands have they want to introduce a product to a particular market. Some brands want to deepen their existing relationships. Some brands have certain structures with which they work. They already have a sales force. Some brands have nothing. They only have a great selling product which is in a different region, and they are open to trying out, and they want to experiment even whether to invest in this particular region or not. They want to try by putting out something in Jumbo Tail, right? So we have a capable team of category management teams and brand management teams that deals with these brands and their managers, help them solve their goals. And we have technology product for targeting. What you said is absolutely right. We have you can target using our targeting tools to a very specific handful of retailers that you want in this geography, who has done that, who has not done this, who has viewed the chips packet, and who has not purchased your chips. All of those things you can target, and we will be able to target. And second one is that this is not something that they can do in their current distribution system. Second is we ensure that there is no revenue leakage. So today there are many schemes that they actually conceive for the offline distribution system that they have, but the distributor is making a claim, or CNF is making a claim, and there is no way for them to actually factually check whether this actual sale to the kirana happened. So it's quite possible that somebody dumps in the wholesale and then still claims, and there is no way, right? So here that threat doesn't exist. They are 100% guaranteed that these small stores actually saw their products, stocked them up, we delivered them. So we are taking that responsibility as well of delivering. So the truth and the maximization of the outcomes that they're looking to achieve for the trade marketing schemes is very, very high on our platform, which we are helping them do. Almost, all the brands are, benefiting from it.
Yeah, the trade marketing, the hidden levers with which some stores actually make money beyond the margins. So trade marketing schemes. So I can talk a whole day about that, but amazing. So now you forayed into the rest of the country. India is not necessarily a homogeneous market. It has regional differences. I think you've definitely found the right footing. Do you expect to see, where do you go from here? What's the next destination?
So we'll be a
for
national
Jumbo Tail?
player. By end of this year, we should be, north of 15 to 20 cities. We are seeing that yes, there are definitely market nuances, but the core problems faced by the Kirana stores are pretty same. In all the cities wherever we have gone, we pretty much got a red carpet from the Kirana stores so far. It's also that we are entering. See, there are two levels of shift that has to happen. One is I have to buy from instead of going to a mandi or a distributor, I have to buy online. That's the first mental model shift. Then among online, I have to buy from player X or player Y or player Z. With a lot of large players also taking a favorable view of this market opportunity and investing their marketing dollars, we are able to ride on top of many of those good work already done in conditioning and educating the mom and pop stores about the values of being digital. Second is the COVID has really accelerated. When COVID really strikes right, many of these Salesforce driven model just vanishes from the scene completely. Like no salespeople come to your shop, there is movement restrictions. Goods vehicles are allowed, but salespeople are not allowed. So Kirana stores are completely unserved, even the big ones. And those times, the online and including Jumbo Tail, many of the markets that we are present, we were the last man standing to that end. And we were fortunate to know what it means to be a last man standing platform. So we were able to serve them. And then these Kirana stores became even more, valuable, evangelists for us because they saw us serving them through these tough times and putting our own lives in danger, our people on the ground. They endanger their lives to ensure go delivery so that the store owner doesn't have to go to the mandi and get into danger, because mandi is an aggregation point of so many different people from the city. Your chances of getting a COVID is very high in that place. Now, if you are getting a storefront delivery, why not? So COVID has again helped us. What would have taken 3 to 5 years to make a mental model shift in the Kirana stores, they are hearing stories from their other clan, as I may call, who are using these even if they are not using, about the benefits of purchasing from online platforms. So we are very happy and we are very fortunate to be able to serve the mom and pop stores during these tough times.
Awesome. What doesn't kill you only makes you stronger, right?
Yeah, I think the market is very large. We are all going to survive and thrive.
Right. Awesome. Fantastic. Karthik, this has been an amazing conversation. Do you read?
I didn't get what is.
Do you have a reading habit?
Yeah.
Do you have a reading habit?
I do read, but what kind of?
Now, what's the most interesting book or a book that really tickled your imagination that you read recently?
I think I'm recently restarted reading a book called Black Swan. It was presented to me.
Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Yeah, it was presented to me by my school principal in 2010, and
right.
After that, I read once at that time, because 2008 was the Black Swan event, and then I read once, and then I'm rereading it right now. Since now that the world has undergone one more Black Swan. And I saw and I see that how some of the people, they're not conforming, and then they know consciously the Black Swan event, they're doing the right things. Especially talks about traders who make it very, very big, extremely big in these Black Swan events, and all of those things that he talks about.
Yeah. Well, demonetization, GST, and COVID. 3 Black Swan events under 5 years, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Black Swans are becoming white swans now. It's just that you don't know what to expect. So you can expect something's gonna be around, and maybe some other event.
Yeah.
So, Anti-Fragile is another great book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Okay.
As a follow-up to Black Swan.
Okay.
And then there's another book he wrote called Skin in the Game. All outstanding, literally contrarian and lateral thoughts in each one of those books.
Yeah.
So. Amazing. So Karthik, this has been a fabulous conversation. We loved having you. I know this can go on for at least another hour or so, but I think we'll leave it here and come back and revisit and have you on our platform again when you scale the next peak, which I think is going to be in about a year's time, where you transform some more cities, and looks like you have the technical DNA, you have the value system right, and you're making the right moves in the system, I can definitely see a lot of big things happen down the line. Before we say any closing comments before we sign off?
It was refreshing to hear a two-way conversation in this podcast rather than a Q&A style. I enjoyed learning from your perspectives and many things that you shared around the life of a store or the FDA policies or your perspectives on other things. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karthik. We wish Jumbotail the very best. And if Maharajas of Scale can help in any way, please do let us know.
Sure.
We wish you the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed listening to the show and want to help support our show, please leave us a review by visiting our website maharajasofscale.com/reviews. It helps other people like you discover the show. I totally appreciate your support. If you're a founder or an entrepreneur or anyone interested in or working with startups, this show is where you see discussions in depth about founder stories, their playbooks, and learn more about growth strategies. Visit our website for regular updates or wherever you get your podcasts and discover more awesome episodes. I'll see you on the next episode. Click on the bell icon and hit subscribe to get the latest episodes.